we were expecting some sort of response. So far, they have, had mini responses, if you like, missile attacks and so on that have not got through Israel's defenses. They were beginning to look weak anyway, and they will look very weak if they don't respond to these latest activities.
Should we go straight to Richard while we've got him? Because we have got so many questions to get through. And it is worth emphasising what Fee just mentioned there, that there are indications in the last 10 minutes or so that Iran is preparing to launch a ballistic missile. So let's talk to Richard Spencer, correspondent for The Times, has reported from the Middle East for many years and joins us now from Tel Aviv. So first of all, Richard, take us through this news about Iran and what it might be about to do.
That's just intelligence received from the Americans, that they have intelligence suggesting that might be the case. We don't really know what that means. We are expecting some sort of response from Iran to the extraordinary events of the last few days and weeks. They don't have a huge amount they can do other than send missiles, because the two forces they have closest to Israel, Hezbollah and Hamas, have been so thoroughly taken out in terms of their command structures by Israel at the moment. So I think this is the response we would expect. But as I say, it's only very preliminary reports at the moment.
So this is in part because Iran cannot be seen to be doing nothing. That would really seem a very weak stance to take from their perspective.
Yes, I mean, they have been dealt a whole series of blows, not just in the last couple of weeks, but in the last couple of years, actually, going back to the killing of Qasem Soleimani, who was the head of the Quds Force, who was assassinated on the orders of Trump in 2020. Then the head of their own, the general who ran their nuclear program, was killed inside Iran by Mossad later on that year. As of this year, of course, we've had the response to the October the 7th attacks, which has caused, huge losses to Hamas and to Hezbollah. And in the last 2 weeks, such a destructive effort on Hezbollah by Israel. So we were expecting some sort of response. So far, they have had mini responses, if you like, missile attacks and so on that have not got through Israel's defenses. They were beginning to look weak anyway, and they will look very weak if they don't respond to these latest activities.
You mentioned October the 7th. I'm just moving on now to questions from listeners, Richard. Emma asks, how could Mossad miss what Hamas had planned for October the 7th, given how they infiltrated pages and knew exactly where Hezbollah leaders were hiding? Do you have an answer to that?
This is one of the most important questions from that day. We are promised there will be a full inquiry of what happened there. I mean, the superficial answer is that they thought Hamas were pacified. They thought that, all the training drills and so on that their intelligence had picked up were just drills. When you're dealing with Hamas and sometimes other forces in the Arab world, you are dealing with a lot of bluster sometimes. So you hear a lot of Hamas statements about the strength of their military, but I think they had clearly become complacent at some level. But then there were also the fact that they did have intelligence, that there was some action being planned, but they didn't seem to take it seriously. So at all levels, this was clearly a massive failure and something that many Israeli citizens have been asking. On the other hand, the authorities, the government and the leadership have said, well, we have to deal with what's in front of us first, and then we'll reconsider that issue. So, there is I would wish I could give a clear answer to that one. I don't have it myself.
This is an anonymous question. Israeli media is currently showing photos of the tunnels now being explored by the Israeli army that go from Lebanon into Israel. The implication would be preparation for some sort of October the 7th style incursion by Hezbollah into Israeli territory. If the Western world are saying that a ground incursion is not justified, how exactly are Israel meant to deal with these tunnels?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, one answer that you might say is that, in comparison with that extraordinary security failing on October the 7th in Gaza, the situation, from that very fact is clearly very different on the northern border. The southern strip of Lebanon is very closely under Israel's monitoring. I've been in one of those tunnels that they'd already exposed in northern Israel, going from one to the other. There was a Hezbollah battle plan, which is to cut off a little strip of northern Israel around the town of Metula. Or Israel believes there was such a plan, using these tunnels to infiltrate Hezbollah forces into northern Israel and to cut off in that little area and hold it hostage. That was the plan they said they uncovered several years ago now. I mean, I saw that tunnel back in, I think it was about 2018, that particular tunnel. So they do have intelligence coverage of that. The question of how you deal with continual missile attacks from Lebanon as well as from Gaza, that's the $1 million question. The question is, do you need this constant war and this constant destruction of Israel's neighbors that we've seen in Gaza and that we've seen before in Lebanon in previous Israeli invasions, or is there some political solution which could actually pacify all Israel's borders? That's a big dividing question in Israel itself.
A question from Matt, and I think this is really interesting. Where is Saudi Arabia in all of this? Huge investment with the NEOM project. They've got sports investments going on all over the world, of course, notably that recent boxing bout here in London. Stuff going on the Red Sea coast. It can't be in Saudi's interest for there to be such unrest in the region, but the country seems to remain silent. What do you say about that, Richard?
Saudi's position is, the trouble with October the 7th for Saudi Arabia was it caught them just as they were in the middle of a fairly massive strategic shift, both in terms of their internal politics and in their engagement with the outside world, and in terms of their view of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The internal things you can't ignore. Saudi Arabia's new leader, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who's the day-to-day ruler, has, as a lot of us know, he's completely changed the face of Saudi Arabia from the inside in terms of opening up its society, scrapping the role of the religious police, inviting in musicians, rock stars, concerts, opening up cinemas, all the things that were banned in Saudi Arabia for so long. Not obviously making it democratic in any way at all. Still huge restrictions on free speech, even more people than usual locked up. But that was part of his trying to show the Western world that Saudi Arabia was a much more normal society than we gave it credit for. And part of that was to change its position on the Middle East politics, if you like, instead of being, the support of last resort for the Palestinians, which it was from 1945 onwards, but had, actually long since ceased to be. I mean, Iran is the agent that supports all these resistance groups against Israel now. Saudi Arabia is very hostile to Iran. So Saudi Arabia had basically stayed out of the whole issue for a number of years, while at the same time having this moral position of being the place that the Sunni Muslim world went to meet and make pious statements about the two-state solution. But it hadn't really been actively involved, but was becoming more actively involved, but sort of more on the Israeli side, looking to normalize relations with Israel, and rather bypass Iran and its resistance groups through that. This war has stopped it doing that. It can't do that now. But if you believe people, who know MBS, they say that he still wants ultimately to normalize with Israel, but he knows that he can't do it at the moment because it would just be too unpopular with the Saudi people. There's a quote which may be apocryphal, relayed third hand, that he said to one of his advisors, my trouble is that I don't care about the Palestinian people, but my people do. So he's caught in a bind there. So you will hear the Saudi foreign minister make very strong statements in support of the Palestinians as a whole and calling for a ceasefire and criticizing the Israeli response to the events of October the 7th. But you don't see much active involvement on the ground trying to, take up the cause of the Palestinians on the ground, and certainly not Hamas.
This is a tough one. Nigel asks, is a two-state solution in practice dead?
It's such a tough question that I and virtually everybody else answers yes and no, because that is the only answer you can give. Yes, it's dead in that there is nobody actively proposing at the moment the contours of a two-state solution that Israel will accept. So Netanyahu is the long-term leader of Israel. He's been there on and off for since 1996, the dominant figure. He is opposed to a two-state solution. He doesn't quite say so completely. He doesn't say he will lay his life down on the line to stop a two-state solution, but he has made it clear that he will do nothing to bring about a two-state solution unless he is really forced to, I guess, by America. But every proposal for a two-state solution, he certainly will not take forward. And let's face it, the Arab world, whether it's the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, whether it's Hamas, whether it's neighboring countries, whether it's the axis of resistance, whether it's the Iranians, none of them have found a way to force Israel to accept a Palestinian state. So in that sense, no, there is no a two-state solution is dead. On the other hand, if you want to see a long-term solution for the crisis in the Middle East, for Israel's relations with its neighbors, let alone, the fate of the Palestinian people themselves, what other solution is there? Israel is not going to accept a one-state solution, that's for sure. So some solution has to be found, you would think, one day or the other, if Israel is to survive, let alone the Palestinian people. And what other solution is anyone offering? And no one's offering anything there either, really.
Can I ask a question myself, Richard? We're reporting today that thousands of people are leaving Lebanon, crossing the border into Syria. But that's a country recently still decimated by its own internal and external strife. So what meets those people in Syria?
Yeah, a very hostile environment, I think you'd have to say. It partly depends who they are. Some Syrian refugees are going back. There's been a little bit of leakage sounds a horrible word. I don't mean it in an insulting way. There's been trickles of Syrian refugees who, of course, fled that war. Many of them in Lebanon were fleeing not only the war but Assad's regime directly. So you have a lot of people from formerly rebel-held areas in Syria who do not want to go back, who think their lives will be in danger if they are sent back to Syria. But that balance of safety is changes every time there are bombing raids on the Bekaa Valley, for example, where a lot of the Syrian refugees are living in camps or informal settlements. Or indeed living in towns that might be attacked by Israel. So I'm sure that a lot of people will be reluctant to go back, but feel they have no choice, or maybe this was the straw that broke the camel's back, that they were already thinking they might have to go back or might want to go back to their homes, see what happens, and this is the trigger for it. Then you also have some Lebanese, I guess, fleeing. And those people right in the border area it might be the easiest place to go. But yes, you're not seeing the floods that you have people going over the border that you saw in 2006 when there were much more intensive bombing raids in, for example, the Bekaa Valley, and in that war. And on that occasion, lots of Lebanese fled to the towns just on the Syrian side of the border and were given refuge there. And then the Syrian war broke out and the boot was on the other foot.
It's gosh, I mean, the more I learn, the more complicated the picture is. Let's be honest. Anonymous asks for Richard. The UN force in Lebanon has been there for over 40 years to attempt to stop a Hezbollah military build-up. So, what has it achieved?
Yeah, that's something the Israelis ask on a regular basis. It's a slightly unfair question because UNIFIL, as the UN force in Lebanon is known, was sent in to keep the peace. It was not given a mandate to take on any military force. The resolution that covers them there. Actually, I mean, there were two resolutions, or more in fact, but two main resolutions at different stages of the conflict. The most relevant one recently was the one in 2000 when Israel withdrew from southern Lebanon, and the blue line that re-established the border between Israel and Lebanon was set up. So UNIFIL are there to monitor the blue line and basically provide information. And they have a peacekeeping team there that basically provides security and information. They do not have a mandate to actually physically take on Hezbollah and remove Hezbollah's weapons. So yes, they are a bit of a paper tiger. But they have suffered losses over the years. The UN force, I think it's true to say that it's one of those unusual facts that Ireland have lost more soldiers in Lebanon than anywhere else other than Ireland since Ireland's foundation a century ago, because Ireland has historically provided forces for that peacekeeping operation and has lost a number of troops there. So it is a bit of a paper tiger, but it's such a small player in the complex world of Lebanese security that it's rather hard to blame it really, for what's happening there.
Richard, thank you so much. We could have gone on a lot longer, and we should get you back if that's at all possible. But we really appreciate your time this afternoon.